Whispering Rock Psychic Summer Camp was founded 5 years before the start of Psychonauts. I wish I could give you an exact year because it would make that sentence a lot cleaner sounding, but sadly we don't actually know what year it is. To make matters even worse, the chronicle of the history of the camp, which is inscribed on a massive log in the camp's parking lot, says things like 500 years ago and 75 years ago, or at least Raz reads them like that. But wouldn't those numbers need to change every year for the logic to make sense? I'm just splitting hairs here. It is a fantasy game and it doesn't need to make perfect sense. But the history of Whispering Rock Psychic Summer Camp is extremely important to the world of Psychonauts, and to many of the characters who we've met or will meet soon. Welcome back to my deep dive into Psychonauts, discussing the story and levels from a whole bunch of different perspectives. If this is your first video, then hi, hello, welcome. This is actually part number 4 in this series, but feel free to stay and hang out, or go back and watch the earlier videos. Just be warned, if you haven't played Psychonauts yet, there are spoilers ahead, so go play the game first and then report back. Seriously, it has been out for over 20 years. You have no excuse. Now, off we go. Back to the very beginning, both of this story and to the first video in this series, where I briefly mentioned that Whispering Rock was built on a deep cache of Psytanium, an ore which enhances or exacerbates mental powers. Well, according to the log, which I just realized is a great pun because it's a log of events, but it's also literally written on a log, but I digress. The log says that 500 years ago, a meteorite full of Psytanium crashed into the Earth, which created a massive crater. Then, around 200 years ago, the natives of the area began using Psytanium to make arrowheads, which are found throughout the camp and used as a currency in the game. It's also important to know that the natives called the Psytanium Whispering Rock, which is a rough translation, and also how the camp got its name. 100 years ago, prospectors and settlers moved to the area, establishing the boomtown of Shaky Claim. Shaky Claim was quickly affected by the Psytanium, and within a year, the town saw its first case of paranormal hysteria. Things continued to escalate exponentially, leading to Houston Thorny founding Thorny Towers Home for the Disturbed. Within 15 years of the asylum's founding, now 60 years before the time of the game, there are more people living in Thorny Towers than in Shaky Claim, and that is when Houston Thorny throws himself off the tower. 5 years after his death, Thorny Towers was shut down and the government paid the last residents of the valley to leave before they flooded it, creating Lake Oblongata and covering Shaky Claim entirely. And finally, we are back to the very start of this video, where 5 years ago, Whispering Rock Psychic Summer Camp is created, sitting on the shores of Lake Oblongata and deeply affected by the Psytanium. Although, with their latent psychic abilities, the campers are enhanced instead of being driven insane like the residents of Shaky Claim. We will be meeting some folks who are negatively affected by the Psytanium, but they reside at Thorny Towers, which, despite its closure, still sits across the lake from the summer camp. Whispering Rock Psychic Summer Camp is divided into a few areas, so I figure the best way to talk about the camp is to explore each area and then categorize it by which version of Ford Cruller we meet there. I mentioned this briefly in my first analysis video, but seeing as it's going to be really important right now, let's dive in and talk about Agent Ford Cruller, founder of the Psychonauts and current lowly agent, for reasons I will explain. Fair warning here, much of Cruller's lore is explored more in Psychonauts 2, and while I won't go too far into those details, it is important to at least understand some of what makes him the way he is. So, as I mentioned, Cruller can be found with multiple different personalities around Camp Whispering Rock, from a grill master to a park ranger or a sailing instructor. When Raz talks to Cruller in his sanctuary located beneath the camp, where Cruller is in his most lucid state, he says that his mind was fractured during a huge battle. Cruller, in his sanctuary, is safe from the effects of the shattering because of his proximity to the Psytanium deposit under the camp. But when he ventures out of the sanctuary, he can't stay in his right mind, so he takes on alter egos. Cruller is a deeply fascinating character, and his backstory and the creation of the Psychonauts is all explored more in the sequel, but what I will say for now is that we eventually learn that Cruller actually fractured his own mind using a device called the Astrolabe to repress certain memories. But that is Psychonauts 2 stuff, and I'll save that for a future deep dive, maybe. No promises on that one, it's a long way away, and I have so much more left to talk about in this game. So, almost every section of Camp Whispering Rock has its own version of Cruller that we meet. In the center portion of the camp, the main campgrounds, where the lodge is located, Cruller is the grill master, and he runs the camp shop. Although he is actually seen earlier in the game as a park ranger outside the lodge briefly. Speaking of which, fun fact, Cruller was actually a park ranger before the founding of the Psychonauts, and this persona is potentially him reverting to an earlier version of himself. Park Ranger Cruller is typically located in the GPC and wilderness area, where he can be talked to about the camp scavenger hunt, which I will talk more about later on. The first Cruller that we meet, other than the real Cruller who visits Raz during the game's tutorial, is the janitor Cruller, who's actually blocking the way out of the kids' cabins area until you finish basic braining. Typically though, janitor Cruller is found in the reception area. The reception area is where the game's opening cutscene takes place, and Cruller is located near the janitor's trailer. The final Cruller alter ego is Admiral Cruller, who can be found in the boathouse near the beach, and who is essential for reaching Mia's dance party. That is all for Cruller's alter egos, but the real Cruller is found beneath the camp in a cave called Ford's Sanctuary. The location is pretty essential to some of the game's core systems, but I will be saving that one for last, I think. For now, let's get started at the kids' cabins area, the first place we go in the game once we gain full control of Raz after the opening cutscene. Also, notably, the only area that doesn't have its own specific Cruller. I get it. Although it would be funny to have Cruller disguised as like a little child or something, it wouldn't make much sense. The kids' cabins area have, you guessed it, cabins. 3 cabins to be exact. A boy's cabin, a girl's cabin, and a third cabin that it appears can be for anyone. But it is also home to a treehouse where Coach Oleander hosts his basic braining session. That is really it for the majority of this area, however there is still plenty of collectibles and a few hidden things sitting around. And now we should probably go into all the collectibles that can be found around Whispering Rock, because there are a lot of them. The primary collectible you'll find around the camp are Psy cards and Psy challenge markers. Psy cards are exactly like they sound. They're playing cards that can be found scattered and floating around the camp. 9 Psy cards can then be combined with a Psy core, which you can buy at the camp store to make a Psy challenge marker. Psy challenge markers can be found around the camp or crafted, and they will instantly give you a level up, or as it's called in the game, a new Psy cadet rank. In total, there are 89 Psy cards and 6 Psy challenge markers that can be found spread around the entire camp. The other major collectible around the camp is scavenger hunt items, which are spread around the camp, some hidden, others in plain sight, but with special requirements needed to collect them. In total, there are 16 items to collect, but only 15 of them are actually found at the camp, leaving one more, which is found at Thorny Towers Asylum, which we will reach later on. Also, the fact that there is a scavenger hunt item at Thorny Towers implies that Agent Cruller, who I assume set up the scavenger hunt, wants Raz to go to the asylum, so maybe he can read the future? I'm not totally certain on that one. Collecting the first 8 scavenger hunt items gives Raz 4 Psy Cadet ranks, and then you get another 4 once the rest of the items are found. As I mentioned in a previous video, gaining Psy Cadet ranks allows Raz to learn new abilities or upgrade the abilities that he already has. In total, there are 100 levels in the game, although in order to beat the game, you only need to reach level 30 to unlock invisibility. But you'll certainly reach a higher level throughout the game. Other unlocks include pyrokinesis, telekinesis, and eventually there are upgrades like health regeneration and infinite ammo. If you hit level 100, you also unlock a special cutscene, but we can talk about that one near the end of the game because it will make literally 0 sense if I show you it now. Okay, back to the kids' cabins. Around the kids' cabins, there are 12 Psy cards and 1 Psy challenge marker, and there's also 1 hidden scavenger hunt item. Up above the cabins, in the hillside, is a cave, which you can climb your way up to using various trampolines and ropes. At the very bottom of the cave, you'll find a fridge with a turkey sandwich frozen in a block of ice. The sandwich can't actually be grabbed until you unlock pyrokinesis, but once you have that, you can just melt the block and grab it. And that's your first scavenger hunt item. The kids' cabins is a pretty small area, and not a lot of important stuff happens there, but there are occasional side story beats that take place around, such as Dogen exploding squirrels with his mind, and Nils, who can be found using clairvoyance to try and peek inside the girl's cabin. Speaking of Nils, he is one of the campers I haven't actually talked about yet in my videos, but I will do a roundup on all of the campers later in this video because they all have their own lives going on throughout the course of the game. For now though, let's actually move on to the next area, the main campgrounds, home of the lodge and the parking lot. The main campgrounds is the largest section of Camp Whispering Rock in terms of size. It has 18 side cards, 1 side challenge marker, and 2 scavenger hunt items. The first item is a gold doubloon hidden beneath the lodge, and the second is an eagle claw placed on a platform high above the camp, which you'll need levitation to reach. Most of the areas of Camp Whispering Rock have various jumping puzzles and platforming sections, which is how you end up getting a majority of the side cards and the challenge marker. There are plenty of ropes to walk across, poles to climb, and of course, you can also play basketball in the parking lot once you have the ability to levitate. The main campgrounds are most important though the first time you visit, where Ranger Cruller stops you and gives you the guide for the scavenger hunt. I would say the most unique part of the main campgrounds though is the lodge, where we can find the camp shop run by Grillmaster Cruller. The shop sells a variety of items, ranging from cosmetic to actually necessary to beat the game. The few lesser important items are the Psi Energy Colorizer for 250 arrowheads, which allows you to change the color of your Psi abilities like levitation. The second is actually a merit badge, and the only merit badge that isn't actually earned through, merit. The Mental Magnet badge costs 400 arrowheads and lets you suck in things like arrowheads, health, ammo, and lastly, we have the Dream Fluffs, which cost 50 arrowheads and they restore health. Now for the important items. First and cheapest is Psi Cores, which as I previously mentioned are combined with Psi cards to make challenge markers. They only cost 10 arrowheads apiece and there are 19 total that you can buy in the game. The second item is the Dowsing Rod for 50 arrowheads, and I gotta say, if you could somehow beat the game without it, you are insane. The Dowsing Rod allows you to search for deep pockets of arrowheads, which provide you with many, many more arrowheads than just searching for regular ones on the ground. And the Dowsing Rod is basically essential to get the final item, the Cobweb Duster, which I have talked about before, but it allows you to collect mental cobwebs. The duster costs 800 and would take forever to buy without the Dowsing Rod. Now that we aren't in the mental world, remember those silly mental cobwebs we collected that didn't do much for us the last time I talked about them? Well, outside the mental world, they have a really important use. We can turn them into Psi cards, thanks to a special machine hidden somewhere at the camp. Well, not really hidden, we just haven't talked about it yet, but we will get there eventually. I really need to stop getting ahead of myself. The camp is like a really big area. Before we move on from the lodge, it is important to note that there is a scavenger hunt item inside the building. If you look up into the rafters, you can find a lovely voodoo doll. But with that, we can head back outside. Down the hill from the lodge is the parking lot, where we can find that wonderful log that I was talking about at the very start of the video. You know, the log that's also a log of the history of Camp Whispering Rock. There is also the previously mentioned basketball hoop, but that is about it for now. The main campgrounds sort of act as a connector for the whole camp, with paths leading to every other major sub-area. Although there are a few sub-areas, such as Ford's Sanctuary, as well as Sasha Nein's lab, which have to be accessed through alternate paths, including one form of travel I haven't mentioned yet, the hidden underground transit system. Hidden around the entire camp, conveniently inside hollow stumps, you can access the Underground Rapid Transit System, or URTS. Actually, don't call it that. The Underground Rapid Transit System is simply a fast way to travel to different areas of the map. with most locations having one station. Although, the main campgrounds has 2. What's really interesting about the transit system, though, is also that it's a character. Whenever Raz enters the system, a robot speaks to him and asks him where he wants to go. Well, more specifically, it asks where Ford Cruller wants to go, because as it turns out, the transit system belongs to Cruller, and it's how he gets around the camp so quickly. As a fun little touch, depending on where you travel to, it will change Cruller's title to the alter ego that belongs to the area you're going to. So if you go to Ford's sanctuary, it calls him Noble Psychomaster, but if you go to the beach, it calls him Admiral. It's a really nice, small detail.
It's time to go to the lake.
Yes, sir, Admiral, sir.
Now, speaking of the beach, let's actually take a trip to the water next. On the east side of the camp, you can find the boathouse and beach. Typically, the first time we come here is to visit Agent Mia Vodello to learn levitation, but at that time, parts of the area are being blocked off by camp bully Bobby Zilch. The area has a few different places of note. Around the beach and closer towards the main camp, there are several parkour challenges for Psy cards and the like. Next, there's the boathouse where Admiral Cruller hangs out. The first time you go to the beach, you have to talk to Admiral Cruller to get a boat, because Raz can't meet Mia's classroom without it. I know I've mentioned it before, but this is the first major area where Raz's water problems come into play. As this is a beach on Lake Oblongata, of course there is a lot of water. The problem is that Raz can't go in the water due to his family's curse, so every time he touches the water, a spooky hand reaches out to grab him. As a random note on that too, the magic water hand is actually called the Hand of Galocchio, which is named after the rival circus family, the Galocchios, who put a curse on Raz's family. If you're close to land, Raz is actually able to bounce a few times on the water before being dragged under and taken back to shore. But around the boathouse area, there are also several Psy cards that you can't reach because they're just simply too far to bounce across, and you'll need to get levitation so Raz can get across safely. At the back of the boathouse, there is the bathysphere, which kind of looks like a giant diving helmet, harkening back to what Raz sees the first time he enters the brain tumbler experiment, when the big scary monster spits one out. The bathysphere is actually the next path we have to take to continue the story, but that is for next video to worry about. The beach serves as a point of interest for a lot of the game, and it also kind of acts as a divider for what I consider to be the first and second halves of the game, although that is a fairly lopsided thing because the latter half is much longer. But several important events bring Raz to the beach. First, it's for Mia's class. Next, after defeating the brain tank boss at the end of the brain tumbler experiment, Raz comes to meet Lily after dark so the two can discuss their weird meaty dreams and maybe kiss, but then Lily gets snatched by Linda the lungfish and taken under the water. After the next area, Lungfishopolis, which we will be talking about in the next video, the beach also serves as the point of return from Thorny Towers whenever you want to come back to camp. The final area of the beach, which I haven't really talked about, is, of course, Mia's classroom, which is a pretty sparse dock floating out on the water. The first time you come to the beach, it can only be accessed by boat, but once you have levitation, you can easily get to it with no problems. One fun little detail, though, is that after Mia disappears from the camp, you can see large footprints left on the dock, pointing to the fact that she was also taken by Linda. Spread across the boathouse and the beach, there are 16 Psy cards, 1 Psy challenge marker, and 2 scavenger hunt items, a copy of Psychonauts Comic 1, and a diver's helmet. The comic is found near the path towards the main camp, and the diver's helmet is above the boathouse itself inside a cave, and it can only be reached after Mia's levitation lesson because you need levitation to reach it. Duh. Near the entrance to the beach, there's actually one other little thing to note. There's a cave entrance which, if you go through it, leads to the GPC and wilderness area of the camp, home to Sasha Nein's lab, and a whole host of other things, which is conveniently where we are headed next. That's called a segue, baby. The first thing you will notice in the GPC and wilderness area, and the one worth talking about first, is the GPC itself, the Geodesic Psycho-Isolation Chambers. It takes up a majority of the area, and it is encased in a giant barbed wire fence that is visible across the whole zone. There actually isn't a ton of information about the use of the GPCs, but it's pretty easy to infer that the chambers are used almost like a sensory deprivation tank, where psychics can lock themselves away to train their abilities and block out extra influences. Around the large metal structure, there are a few small chambers, and then there's one big one, which actually serves as the entrance to Sasha Nein's lab. There are a lot of horror stories about the GPC, including the first time you visit, you find that Bobby Zilch has locked Maloof, another camper, inside. And Vernon also tells Raz that he was once locked inside a chamber for 3 days. We don't know if that was done by accident or not. If you talk with Maloof after rescuing him, he actually reveals an inconsistency in the lore of the universe. Maloof says that the camp hasn't locked campers in the GPC since the 50s, but as we know from the log, the camp was only founded 5 years ago, so either the 5 years ago on the log is wrong and the camp is much older, or Maloof is making up something about campers being locked in the GPCs. Honestly, we may never know the answer unless Tim Schafer watches this video and decides to tell us. And if that is the case, hi Tim, I love your work and I would love to get a Brutal Legend 2 someday. Thank you. The last thing to note about the GPC itself is that the outer fence is covered in warning signs that are written in German, a sure sign that they were put up by Sasha Nein himself. Outside the GPC is the actual wilderness. There are a few key places there. There's a cabin nearby where Ranger Cruller hangs out. It could be a ranger cabin, but since the front door is blocked and you can only get in through the roof, I'm gonna assume it's not. This is where you go to turn in scavenger hunt items for rewards. There's also a fair amount of wildlife in the wilderness, including psychic bears who attack with telekinesis, and a squirrel who is protecting one of the scavenger hunt items. There's also a pretty intricate parkour section over the top of the GPC and in the wilderness, which can get you some more side cards. Around the outside of the GPC, there are a few rock sections that you can platform across for various other rewards. The last thing I want to bring some attention to before we prepare to move on to the next area is the water in the wilderness. There's a shallow creek running through the wilderness area, and despite Raz's curse, the water doesn't affect him here. Perhaps it's because the water is too shallow for him to drown in, or maybe there's some other cosmic reason, but for some reason, Raz is safe in the water here. Throughout the GPC and wilderness, there are 18 psi cards, 2 side challenge markers, and 4 scavenger hunt items, each of which requires a different psychic ability to obtain. The first and easiest to obtain is the pirate scope, which is near the cave that leads to the beach. You can use levitation to reach it on top of some tall rocks. Somewhat nearby, outside the fence of the GPC, is the aforementioned squirrel, who is protecting a golden acorn. Using invisibility, you can sneak up on the squirrel and steal it away. A little further behind the GPC, this time near the psychic bear, you can find a miner's skull which is stuck in the ground. Using a shield on top of a nearby geyser will cause the skull to pop out on the other side. Finally, at the end of the stream, there is a glass eye behind a grate, which you can use telekinesis to lift out. Now, before we move on to the final overall area of the camp, we can quickly take a step down into Sasha Nein's lab, where we can find another scavenger hunt item and see a little bit of the madness. Sasha Nein's lab is kind of a mess. As you go down the kind of tacky floating stairs, you can see piles of books and papers, which is actually a very sharp contrast to Sasha's mind. In fact, I think the colors of the stairs are almost the same exact ones as the lamps that Sasha Nein destroys for being too tacky. The way I choose to read it, though, is that Sasha spends so much time curating his own mind, he loses track of what's going on in the real world around him, hence the tacky stairs and the piles of papers. There are a few key things to note in the space. First off, the big machine, the brain tumbler, which is how we first access the brain tumbler experiment. The brain tumbler is really important, especially if you're looking to see everything the game has to offer, because it allows you to revisit minds you've already been to through the collective unconscious. That will allow you to collect any of those pesky missing fragments, cobwebs, or whatever. It also allows the player to see what has changed in people's minds, like how the secret blueprint hallway in basic braining becomes boarded up if you revisit Coach Oleander's mind. The other interesting thing to note is the out-of-place stump in the corner of the space. That is the quick entrance to the underground transit system, and also likely the first place you will access the system. By making the stump extremely obvious, it cues in the player on what to look for to find entrances to the transit. It's just a nice piece of passive tutorialing that fits the surrealist aesthetic of the game. There really isn't much to collect in the area, just 2 side cards and then 1 scavenger hunt item, the fossil, which is sitting on a shelf up above the lab, which you can just reach by jumping from the stairs. You don't even need levitation to get it, so it's basically free money. Now, let's head to the second to last area of the camp we're going to look at, the reception area. Once again, the reception area can be accessed from either the GPC in Wilderness, or it can be reached from a path just off the parking lot in the main campgrounds. As I mentioned earlier, the reception area is actually the first place that we see in the game. The campfire is located there, as well as Janitor Cruller near a trailer. The reception area is actually a pretty big and twisted area with a lot of nooks and crannies to explore, and oddly enough, I think it's more Wilderness than the GPC in Wilderness area. The first thing I want to talk about, as it ties in most deeply to the Psychonauts lore, is the campfire area. For the most part, the campfire is exactly what you would expect from a summer camp, the perfect place for the kids to toast a psychic marshmallow or whatever. But surrounding the fire pit, there are these 7 kind of pillars, depicting the Psychic 6. I know, there are 7 pillars, but it's the Psychic 6. It is explained way more in the sequel. The Psychic 6 are basically the original founding members of the Psychonauts, and you can learn a lot more about them and meet them all in Psychonauts 2. But notably, you can read most of the pillars, but one of them, with an image of who we know is Ford Cruller, is broken, and the name on it is unreadable. This presumably relates to his shattered mind state, as well as his potentially trying to hide his true identity from the campers. Beyond the campfire, of course, lies the janitor's trailer, where you can always find that version of Cruller. And then there's the centerpiece of the area. This jumble of old, destroyed minecart tracks crossing over a small lake. The minecart tracks weave in and out of caves and are of course tied to the boomtown of Shaky Claim, which now lies in Lake Oblongata. There is a ton of stuff hidden around the area, and it could be a little bit of a maze at first to find your way around. But mainly, there are 21 side cards to find, 1 side challenge marker, and 4 scavenger hunt items to look for. The 4 scavenger hunt items here are the dinosaur bone, which is at the top of a tall tree that requires levitation to reach. Then there is the fertility idol, which is near the janitor's trailer. Watch out for the bears and the bees though. Wait. Third is the cherrywood pipe, which is near the path to the GPC in Wilderness. And finally, there is the condor egg, which is the biggest pain to reach. To get it, you have to follow the minecart rails and then make a skillful jump to land on top of a tree. Okay, that was a lot of areas. Actually, like 8 pages worth of script to break the 4th wall, but we still have a little bit more to go, so just stick with me and then we can finally talk about the various campers of Camp Whispering Rock. But for now, there is one last location that I have mentioned several times, Ford's Sanctuary. Ford's Sanctuary can only be accessed by the underground transit system or by teleportation, which can be achieved using bacon. It's a long story. Ford's Sanctuary is a pretty small area. It's primarily made up of an underground platform sat atop a deposit of Psytanium, which makes this area's Cruller the sanest of the bunch. From Ford's Sanctuary, this Cruller is actually able to continue his Psychonaut duties and send agents on missions and monitor the news. Spiraling around the platform, there are tons of holographic screens showing news from around the world, and Agent Cruller stands in the middle. Underneath the platform are 2 of the most important things in the game. There are 2 machines, one of which can be used to combine cards and side cores to make challenge markers, and then there is a machine to unweave mental cobwebs to make more cards. They will both be essential for getting all of the psi ranks in the game. Other than that, there's only one other room in Ford's Sanctuary. Down a tunnel from the back of the cave, there is what's called the Observation Room. For now, there is nothing in there, but once you make your way across Lake Oblongata to Thorny Towers, the space actually holds campers who have had their brains removed. We'll get there eventually though. One interesting note about Ford's Sanctuary being his base of operations is that Cruller was basically informally kicked out of the Psychonauts due to his mental instability caused by the shattering I talked about earlier. Due to his high rank and the fact that he was one of the founders, they couldn't really just kick him out, so he's kind of just relegated to the camp. However, he is still the one sending Oleander, Sasha, and Mia on missions, but he does that undercover, and the other three don't tell the Psychonauts because they just won't accept the missions if they knew Cruller was the one ordering them. And with that, we have finally come to the end of our exploration of the different areas of Camp Whispering Rock. Now, for posterity, I'm going to go through all of the campers and talk a little bit about them. Keep in mind though, basically all of them have their own little stories going on throughout the game, until they get their brains plucked out. So there's still a lot more to get through, but I won't dive too deeply into all of them, just cover the basics. Also, after a later level in the game, you unlock the clairvoyance ability, which allows you to see through other characters' eyes, and each of them sees Raz differently. In fact, literally every character in the game sees Raz differently, so as I go through these, I will attach what Raz looks like to them, and then I will re-go over the adults around the camp and how they see Raz. Okay, with that out of the way, let's get into this. The first camper would be Raz Aquato, but I'm going to go past him, as well as Lily Zanato, whom I've already talked about in previous videos. But I will say that if you use clairvoyance on Lily, she sees Raz as a handsome man, probably a prince. So for now, we're going to talk about Bobby Zilch. As previously mentioned, Bobby is a minor antagonist and the camp bully. He looks like a piece of broccoli, has bad teeth, and picks on literally everyone except for his sidekick, Benny. Bobby tends to think of himself as a strongman. He wears a basketball jersey that shows off his quote-unquote muscles. Through cutscenes, we do learn that Bobby has a crush on Chloe, and Bobby sees Raz as a punching bag through clairvoyance. Also, I'm really sorry for all the name dropping I'm about to do here. Each character will be covered in due time, but I gotta define all these various relationships, and some of them do get a little messy. Also, for this section specifically, thank God to whoever did the campers section of the Psychonauts wiki, because it would genuinely take forever to track down all of the characters' last names and what they see Raz as through clairvoyance. So next up, we have Benny Fideleo, Bobby's sidekick and another bully. When he is with Bobby, he is pretty in your face, but when he's alone, like many henchmen, he loses all of his cool. One of the first encounters with Benny is during basic braining, where you can easily pass him while climbing a net wall, and he complains that Raz is making all the other campers look bad by going so fast. Benny is easily identifiable by his large ears, which is why his nickname is The Nose. Yes, you heard that right, and if you use clairvoyance on him, he sees Raz with big ears. Now for Bobby's crush, Chloe Barge. Also, I'm doing these in mostly alphabetical order, and it just so happens that these three are all in order. What a coincidence. Chloe is kind of an oddball. She always wears a space helmet because she believes she is from outer space. Throughout the game, you can actually hear her over the camp loudspeakers trying to use the camp radio to contact aliens. Chloe sees Raz as an alien through clairvoyance. I'm going to lump Clem Foot and Crystal Flowers Snagrash together because they are basically always together anyway. We first meet the pair during basic braining, and they were very exuberant then, and well, it's drugs. Clem and Crystal are taking crazy drugs, or at least that's how it seems at first. Clem and Crystal are real oddballs, almost like obsessive cheerleaders, and it isn't until much later in the story that we learn they're both severely depressed. There are several cutscenes you can stumble upon in the game, one where the pair both drink a weird bottle, which appeared to be drugs to me at first, but it's later revealed by Crystal to have been poison. Crystal admits that the pair have attempted to throw themselves off the roof of the lodge. Yeah, it's pretty dark. Both of them, though, will see Raz as a football player. Next up, we have Chops Sweetwind. Chops is part of a subplot involving his best friend JT, who starts dating Elka, and Chops has worries that he won't get the chance to spend any time with JT anymore. Chops sees Raz as a hockey player. I've already talked about him quite a bit, but next up is Dogan Boole. He is my absolute favorite camper and Psychonauts character. He's just a little guy who can't control his powers, so he wears a tinfoil hat, and he just means the world to me. Dogan is the first to have his brain removed by Dr. Lobato, and yeah, really it doesn't make a difference for him. In Psychonauts 2, though, we learn that Dogen's grandfather, Compton Boole, was a member of the Psychic Six, and you can find him on one of the pillars near the campfire. Dogen sees Raz as just a floating helmet and goggles. Elka Doom, who I mentioned earlier, is dating JT. We can learn by listening to her talk that her ex-boyfriend is Nils, and she wants to get back together with him. Camp relationships are very messy here. Near the end of the game, Elka and JT do break up, and she goes back to Nils, and Chops gets his friend back. Elka sees Raz as a fly. Elton Fur is easily noticed by the sailor hat that he always wears. Elton is able to talk to fish, and if you talk to him near the beach early in the game, he will talk about the fish being afraid of some scary monster in the lake, and he also mentions the town of Shaky Claim that's beneath the lake. Early in the game, Elton has a crush on Lily, but he later starts dating Milka after she scares Bobby and Benny away from bullying the fish. Elton sees Raz as a stereotypical villain carrying a tied-up Lily. Another friend pair that I can lump together, since they're always together, is Frankie Athens and Kitty Boobai. The pair are stereotypical snobs, and they basically spend the entire game together. At the start of the game, the pair blocks the path from the kids' cabins to the main campground after basic braining until Raz gives them an arrowhead. Both of them see Raz as a fly, just like Elka. James Hoofberger, aka JT, is Chop's best friend and is dressed like a cowboy with a southern drawl to match. As I mentioned, JT starts dating Elka, but the pair doesn't last. JT sees Raz as a cowboy. Maloof Canola, whose name is very fun to say, is the camp weakling. He's constantly being bullied by Bobby and Benny, but he befriends Mikhail, who helps protect him, including using telekinesis on Bobby at one point. Maloof sees Raz as a mobster, which has a connection to the fact that Maloof's family might be part of the Italian mob, but that is unconfirmed. Mikhail Bulgakov is a Russian immigrant and can always be spotted with a tall brown hat on. When he isn't protecting Maloof, he is searching for a quote-unquote giant hairless bear that he says is nearby. The bear turns out to be Linda the lungfish from Lake Oblongata. Mikhail is one of the few campers who actually sees Raz as himself through clairvoyance. Milka Phage is an expert at invisibility, and she dates Elton later on, and the pair can then be seen making out all over the place throughout the game. Not much more to it than that. Sometimes it's the simple things. Milka sees Raz as a shoe. Nils Lutefisk is the camp ladies' man, or he thinks he is. As mentioned before, he is Elka's ex for most of the game, and he basically is only concerned with the ladies. He can be found early in the game trying to use clairvoyance to see inside the girl's cabin, and if Raz uses clairvoyance on him, he simply sees Raz as not a girl. Nils is one of the funniest characters in the game in my opinion. Phoebe Love and Quentin Hedgemouse are the camp musicians, and they can often be found playing together in the main lodge. Phoebe is a drummer, and Quentin plays the turntables. Most of the game, the pair is working to decide on their band name, either the Levitators or the Firestarters, based on the abilities that they are best with. Phoebe specifically has trouble controlling her fire abilities. If you use clairvoyance on Phoebe, she sees Raz as an unlit campfire, and if you use it on Quentin, he sees Raz as himself. But after being saved later in the game, he sees Raz as a Psychonaut instead. And finally, at long last, we have Vernon Tripe, the long-winded camper I talked about during basic braining. Vernon just loves to talk. Usually it is nonsense, but sometimes he says important information, but it's few and far between, so you never know what is even worth listening to. Vernon sees Raz as an ear. Now, just a quick rundown of what the adults see Raz as, and then we can finally be done. Coach Oleander sees Raz as a brain, which is tied to his evil brain plans. Sasha Nein sees Raz as a younger version of himself. Mia Vodello sees Raz as a baby. And lastly, Ford Cruller actually sees Raz as something different between all of his alter egos, including leaves, dust, a mouth, a sailor, and finally, a Psychonaut. I'll let you decide which one belongs with each Cruller. The clairvoyant system is actually just insane, and I could go through and tell you what every single character in the game sees, but there are just too damn many, and it would be incredibly tedious, so I will leave it at that. And that is Whispering Rock Psychic Summer Camp, from top to bottom and back to front. The place makes a wonderful hub world for the game, and there are so many nooks and crannies and small details that it's very worth just running around at least once, making sure to talk to every single camper along the way because the dialogue in Psychonauts is absolutely wonderful. I purposely have left a lot of the dialogue out here because I just genuinely don't want to spoil it. Okay, maybe one good line for fun.
I get it. You're using clairvoyance. You grabbed one of the squirrel's nuts, and now you're using clairvoyance on it to form a mental link and see what the squirrel sees.
Could you say acorns instead of nuts if you repeat that to anybody else?
But that's it. That's all you get. With the camp now out of the way, we are free to move across onto the next section of the game, starting with Lungfishopolis before making our way across the lake to Thorny Towers to complete our mission. I'm not going to rank Whispering Rock because it isn't really a level, but in comparison to other game hub worlds, I'd put it right along something like Super Mario 64's Peach's Castle. It's absolutely wonderful, and it holds a really special place in my heart. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know in the comments and subscribe so you'll know when I release the next episode. You can also find me other places online, including my website, where I write pretty often about whatever, really. And I also stream over on Twitch pretty often, so you can find me there. Yeah, that's really it. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you all in the next episode, Lungfishopolis. Catch y'all on the flip side. Peace.